Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Business Live. Coming up with this bulletin, inflation for April 2026 goes up marginally to 3.4%. We'll bring you more from the government statistician.
If you look at these 10 items, which is charcoal, rent, river fish, smoked herrings, private public secondary school fees, plantain, ginger, accommodation, and pre-primary and primary education, just these 10 items out of 307 items, they contribute 93.1% to what? The April inflation.
So in this bulletin, Ghana to pilot continental digital trade corridor with African partners. We have more from the 3i Africa Summit. Plus, on the Joy Business Van today, we take you to Bethel Dental Clinic, where high-tech industry needs a human touch. We have details of this and more for you. Please stay. All right, so we've got to make way for this interesting conversation coming up pretty soon. And of course, it has to do with the Amalgam of Professional Body Speaker Series, where we are carrying it live for you. Let's now cross over.
To stimulate economic growth. It's coming to you live from AB and David head office here in Accra. And AB and David is a trans-African law firm which has branches in over 40 African countries with the headquarters here in Accra. And our keynote presentation will be by the senior partner of AB and David, David Ofosu-Dorte. David is somebody that most of us know in this country. He's a man of many parts as well, with a strong background in the built environment and a very strong background also in law. In fact, he started his career as a planner, and he's worked in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, across Africa, across the world. He's led some of the biggest projects, and today he'll be talking to us on the topic Centers of Prosperity at the center of the world. How can we manage our cities better to stimulate economic growth? So this is how this evening will be. I will give you the welcome and the context setting, and that's what I'm attempting to do right now. And then we'll have the keynote presentation by David Ofosu-Dorte. And then we'll have a panel discussion. And the panel has key people from the key institutions who are going to discuss David's presentation and also share some extra insights and thoughts on how we build better cities. So on the panel, we'll have Tony Asari. Tony is an architect and the president of GIA, that is the Ghana Institute of Architects. He's a leading voice on building safety, professional oversight in our local assemblies, and also the standards that govern what we put up in our cities. And he writes a lot. You can check his blog out, Gongon Bita. online. You can just Google that, and you see a lot of the things he's written about our built environment and our urban space. Engineer Ludwig Annan Hesse is the president of the Ghana Institution of Engineering, under whose leadership the GHIE has been pressing for stricter adherence to due process and public infrastructure development. He's an engineer of many years' experience, and he's also going to be on the panel. We also have Mr. Benedict Akest. He's the head of plant preparation at the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority, what we know as the Town and Country Planning Department. It used to be Town and Country Planning Department. It's now the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority. And this office is at the very heart of how Ghana cities are meant to grow. And he's also going to be on the panel for today. So this is how the day is going to be. Now, when I was asked to moderate this, I started thinking about the various things I worry about every day. Typically, I wake up around 3 a.m. and most of the time, by the time I wake up, my electricity is on low voltage, so I can't even iron my shirt or microwave breakfast before I get to work. It's because where I live, it was planned or not, but what I see suggests planlessness. So a lot of buildings, everybody connected to the grid, but there's a small transformer which looks like the heart of an ant, which has to supply a whole community. It cannot, and it all speaks to this. So it affects how my day begins and how productive I can be. Because if I wake up at 3 and I even want to process food to sell, because of the voltage, I cannot do that, so it affects my prosperity. Now, when I leave home, for days I have to be on radio at 4 a.m. or 4:30. I see hundreds of people lined up on the roadside looking for trotros to go to work. These are people who practically have to begin work at 8, but have to be by the roadside by 4, 5 to get to work. It means 3 hours of their day practically is gone, because you stand outside for 30 minutes, be tired before you get into a trotro, and ride on a bad road which is under construction, get to work tired before your day begins. If you run your own job or your own business, you get in stressed. If you work for somebody, you get in stressed. Whichever way you look at it, for a journey of 32 kilometers, people should do that within 45 minutes. But they are doing these journeys sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours. And so it worries me. The other thing is also to do with even housing, how most people cannot afford to own what we describe in our laws as affordable housing. So earlier this morning, I saw a friend write on Facebook that the Chinese should get into the affordable housing space and it will be more affordable. I told him that that won't work. The fact that we think that the Chinese produce cheaper goods does not mean when it comes to housing, they may succeed, because they will also buy land for 3 times the value and they will pass it on to us. The various challenges the Ghanaian real estate company has to deal with, they also have to deal with that. And that becomes a problem. And even talking about housing, if you go to the peri-urban areas, places that were reserved as buffer zones for food production have now been taken over by housing. So pineapples you should be able to buy in Accra for 10 cedis will cost you 15 cedis, because the pineapples are coming way further away. It used to be around in Sawam, it used to be around Ebri, but now we are going way further. So your pineapples are becoming more expensive. So it means that the little money you are earning, you have to spend a lot more of that to get a pineapple to eat. These are the issues that worry me. And I think today's topic really will help us to discuss these in the with the right context and propose ways forward. So centers of prosperity are the center of the world. How can we manage our cities better to stimulate economic growth? And talking about our cities, Accra is the biggest city now when it comes to economic development and GDP. Your biggest port is here. Government agencies are here. A lot of the money is spent from Accra. A lot of the corruption is also projected from Accra. And so how can we manage Accra to make corruption better or otherwise, and to make governance better and to make our lives better? Kumasi, as projected by the World Bank, is also going to be one of the big mega cities with time. How do we build Kumasi, manage Kumasi to be a center of prosperity? 10 years ago, we projected that the flooding issues in Accra would start happening in Kumasi. And these days, when we report flooding in Accra on 5th of June, you should expect a response from Kumasi in 42 hours or 48 hours. It will rain and the same thing will happen. The same transportation challenges we have in Accra, the same traffic issues are happening in Kumasi. The same housing issues are happening. So it's a lot of things to unpack today. And that is why the JoyNews team and the Amalgam Speaker Series is bringing you this conversation. And before we begin and invite David to give his presentation, I really want to do something we hardly do. I want to have the people in here introduce themselves and tell us what they do and how it will help us achieve the dream of having an utopian Ghana and not a dystopian Ghana. So I'll start with the first person. Sir, please introduce yourself, your institution, what you do, and how do you contribute to getting us to have a better urban system that will drive prosperity?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Engineer Kwabena Bempong, and I am the immediate past president of the Ghana Institution of Engineering, and also the Chief Executive Officer of Associated Consultants Limited. My area of practice, or let me put it first, the area of practice of my firm is in infrastructure provision. So we're providing roads, the drainage, and all facilities to do with, infrastructure. But then we're also in the space of providing housing in terms of designs. So even personally, I'm also into some small-time real estate for myself and also for other clients. So that is what we bring to bear on the topic in terms of managing our cities better, because we provide infrastructure. And infrastructure, as you have described, is very important for our cities to better work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Please introduce yourself as well. Yo, you can sit. You can sit, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Alhaji Saka Dumba. I'm the president of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, Ghana. But I'm a proper transportation planner. And CILT, that is the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, is the most professional body so far as transport, logistics, and supply chain professionals are concerned. And we actually advise government on areas that will let our lives better. For example, infrastructure is so huge, and we deal in road safety as well. You realize that accidents or crashes happen because we don't have proper infrastructure. We also go a long way to train people who manage vehicles, cold chains, and all that to prevent accidents. So we do a lot of training of drivers. We actually underrate the work of the driver. For example, you go and buy...
Please, you have 20 seconds.
Okay. I mean, we have a lot to do so far as infrastructure is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So I said I wanted everybody to introduce themselves, but I'm looking at the time now, and I'm going to suspend that for now. But as we get into the conversations, we all get to introduce ourselves and make progress. I wanted to ask Alhaji whether the government listens when you advise them, because you said you advise the government on transportation. And Charlie, Accra Kumasi, I used to do that in 3 hours, and people used to tell me I'm crazy. But from Accra to KN University is 241 kilometers. With a very good car and a very good driver, I should be able to do 80 kilometers to 100 kilometers per hour. Average, 3 hours, you should get there. Now it takes 15, 16, 17. So do the people who are mandated to run infrastructure and ensure convenience actually experience these and listen to the technocrats when they advised? I'm just asking this based on your introduction. So we are going to get straight into the conversation, and our speaker is ready. We are also ready, and the topic, as has been introduced earlier, is centers of prosperity at the center of the world. Centers of prosperity at the center of the world. How we can manage our cities better to stimulate economic growth. And I love the fact that we have center of the world in this topic or theme, because the speaker is one of the people who coordinated and brought together professionals to work on a center of the world strategy for Ghana. He funded this from his own pocket, and I remember we used to have meetings here and other places. Brought people from tourism ministry, brought people from different institutions, and in 2016, attempted to get Ghana to declare Ghana as the center of the world to create value. And today, he's here to talk about creating prosperity at the center of the world and how we manage our cities better. David Ofosu-Dorte is a man who needs very little introduction, so I'll be very brief with the introduction. He's a senior partner of AB and David. He's a distinguished planner and a distinguished lawyer, and he's our speaker for this evening. Please, let's welcome our speaker with a round of applause.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kojo, thank you for the nice introduction. You know I sip water as I speak, so let me start with it. First, let me express my gratitude to the Amalgam of professional bodies who invited me to speak on this topic, which is part of their public lecture series. And incidentally, I'm being asked to speak at a time when the Accra floods are about to come again. Normally around this time, you will see politicians in their constituencies trying to make excuses for themselves and promising that we are not going to have the floods again. I remember one particular leading politician went up in the helicopter and toured a lot of the cities and said this was going to be the last time. But that was before we had the devastating Accra floods at the filling station at Kwame Nkrumah Circle. And after that, a lot more has happened. But that is a reflection of what happens in places like this. And the context we must understand in taking a look at this is that countries tend to be identified by their cities. For those of you who are in here and who may be seeing the slide I'm just showing, without necessarily telling you where each of the pictures are, you may be able to identify the city. The city may be a reflection of where that city is located. So cities tend to identify countries. Now this is natural because as human beings we tend to live together and we tend to judge each other often by where we live and our understanding of the facilities and circumstances around where we live, even where we work, as well as how we enjoy life. It is the collection of these things that constitute what becomes known as human settlement. So historically, cities have been a part of humanity, and Africa is no different. If you look at Africa's history, there are ancient cities like Timbuktu, which had universities in the past, Cairo and Alexandria, and more recently, Lagos, Accra, Kumasi, Tamale, to mention a few. There's a book published by a famous Nigerian author, Cyprian Ekwensi, who talks about people of the city. And that book deals a fair bit as to the distinction and the types of life between the then Gold Coast and the city where people saw it as a thriving place that people traveled to. But you will notice that over the years, there's always been the so-called urban-rural divide. And the urban-rural divide, from the time of most times that Africans were having independence, tend to be skewed in favor of the rural areas. Interestingly, by 2018, that huge skew was beginning to change. And by 2018, it will appear that the urban areas had caught up with the rural areas. By 2021, it had split almost in the middle. And by 2026, which is the year we are in, you will notice that the urban areas have actually outstripped, in terms of the number of people who live in urban areas, it has outstripped rural areas. So the split between urban and rural divide doesn't look like it looked 50 or 60 years ago. Now, this divide is quite important because it also reflects the challenges that city managers and policymakers face regarding how we manage where we live. And we may describe where we live, whether as a hut, as a village, as a town, as a city, metropolis, or even megapolis. I will return to the megapolis issue. Smaller settlements like villages and huts tend to need less intense management as compared to that of larger areas. And the more intense the number of people there, the higher the density, and as a result, you will see that developments appear to change. So you will find that recently, Accra appeared to be witnessing quite a number of high-rise structures and the move towards living in apartments. Something that 30 years ago was actually almost unheard of. Everybody lived in a bungalow type of accommodation. And if you go way back into the 60s and you look at some of the old places in cantonments which still exist, you will see that buildings were put on 1 acre. There was a lot of land that everybody could afford to live on a very large tract of land. But the increasing density in cities tend to change this. But the problems of human settlement, as I indicated, gets intense with cities. And you will find that as it gets intense, it will lead to many things, including, for example, homeless people. And homelessness often becomes a feature of some of the cities. And Ghanaian cities are by no means exempted from this feature. The other challenge is that the housing, which is a necessity for human beings, tends to become less and less affordable for those who live in the city and who don't have the wherewithal, which is what leads to the homelessness. So the issue of the essentials of the human, of mankind, being the ability to have a place to live, something to eat, and something to wear, becomes challenging where the persons who are living in the city don't have the means. Which means that city managers need to look at how they are able to supply low-cost housing, or how they are able to use such simple measures such as the amount of advance which is collected by landlords to moderate how a person is able to afford whether to live in the city or not. And also the extent to which we actually structure our development. It also leads to the situation where the quality of life is impacted. Water, electricity, hospitals, roads, etc. We will touch on this as we go along. But there is a need to look at this in specifics. The development of cities bring about one very key thing that impacts on legislation, which is the need to distinguish ownership of land from the use of land. And it's one area that we've been lacking as a nation. In less intense development like villages, you can afford to adopt the land that you own to many uses. In cities, it becomes more and more important that owners of land realize that they cannot use it in any manner that they like, and it must be largely impacted by legislation. Of course, that affects rural areas and villages as well, but it's more intense in cities. Now, before we return to regulation of land as separate from ownership, it is important in this chart, and this is a chart, that we talk about ownership of land itself. I don't know of any country in the world where land ownership issues are more confused and chaotic than Ghana. And I say that in all sincerity. I have looked at land ownership structures around many countries in the world. There are some countries in the Eastern Europe which, for example, separate ownership of what is on the land from the land itself. And those structures are unique in their very quality. But in Ghana, where, as in most countries, ownership of land is part of, whatever is on the land is part of the land, the ownership itself is very, very chaotic. And this has a very long history. Anybody who tries to touch on this or attempt to change it must beware that, among other things, the very formation of the Aboriginal Rights Protection Society and the agitation against colonialism was related to the Land Trust Act, which was an attempt to vest the land in the states as a whole. I am not taking anything away from those who fought for colonialism. I am an anti-colonialist myself. I'm drawing attention to the extent to which land ownership is a very big issue, from chiefs being custodians or allodia owners to families, etc. And the double sale and all the rest creates a problem on its own. But for today, let us focus on the use of land and what regulates it. Interestingly, apart from the Kuse Committee that created or developed the Kuse Constitution, almost every constitution of Ghana, as well as development plan, has tried to define exactly what Ghana's territory is and how it had to be managed. The reason I mention this is because that is what dictates how properties exist in space. So, for example, if you go all the way back to the 10-year development plan 1919 to 1929, you will find that at that time, the definition of Ghana is what was subsequently reflected in Cap 84. That definition separated Ghana into the south, which was Gold Coast, the Ashanti, and the Northern Territories. But then it also sought to define the planning area. And that planning area was restricted to Sekondi Takoradi, Cape Coast, Accra, Kumasi, and subsequently Swedru and Sunyani were added. In other words, not the whole of Ghana were declared as a planning area. Subsequently, in 1958, under LN 344, Sunyani was actually added subsequently. Then there are the case of special towns subsequently developed, Akosombo and Tema, being the two key ones. Under the Bui Act, with the development of the Bui Dam, there was a provision for the potential development of a Bui city, but that never was. Michael, it looks like your slides are having challenges. Anyway, we will deal with it. So the special towns and special developments nevertheless have existed, and they also have their own feature, which I will talk about, and how that can affect us or that can help us in finding the way forward. Now, you will find a distinguishing feature when it comes to the development of our cities generally. Two key areas of influence comes from chiefs and politicians. And I will touch on this as we go along. If you happen to be a chief here, my apologies, but you are actually a central part of the confusion so far. I think I'm fine. When it comes to regulation of land. Let us look at how cities emerge, and let's see the extent to which this is an important feature. Generally, cities emerge in three key ways. The first, which I want to deal with, is what is generally known as the radial pattern. Now, that radial pattern is where the location of a specific item tends to cause the radiation, as it were, of many things emanate from that central point. So if you take Jamestown as a typical location, taking Accra, that becomes the basis, which is the original nodal point, out of which many other development occur. And Jamestown is a good example of how the radial pattern occurred in Accra in particular many years ago. Then you have the Gridiron pattern, and a typical example is Tema, where the planners create clear grids in the development, and many of such well-planned places tend to be much, much easier to manage because of the nature of the planning. You can see a similar thing about places like Dansuman, Adabraka, Akosombo, and even Sunyani for that matter. Then you have the linear pattern where the location of two separate points of influence determines how the city develops. If you take Accra as an example, it appears to have all forms of the three types of development: radial from Jamestown, as I've indicated, grid looking at places like cantonments, and at the same time linear. And I want to touch on the linear one, a typical part being how Teshi has expanded as an example. You will find that just the location of Tema Harbour as an example will lead to the need to access the harbour, or the need to access Tema as an industrial area. And until the motorway is created, many who use that may want to take advantage by locating property on the main side of the road. And once the main road side is filled, people build behind those who build on the main road, abutting the main road, and others build behind and behind. And as it goes on, for those countries where we drive on the right turn then becomes a situation where we create backups and get all the kind of congestion that we do get, etc., etc. So as I indicated, we have had all these types of patterns of development in all our cities, and I'm not restricting this to Accra. But it is very obvious that there's a clear mismatch between spatial planning, how we plan our cities, and how our cities themselves have developed. A few examples may suffice. I've already indicated that originally the planning areas consisted of Takwa, Sekeni Takwa, the Cape Coast, Kumasi. Now, Takwa may sound strange to many people. Remember, that was a gold hub for many, many years. And for want of a better word, it was like our Johannesburg. And the density of that place had always been high. And it becoming a planning area was significant. So having said that, you will find that there are situations which emerge where the development of the city does not necessarily follow the three patterns. And one example may suffice: the so-called transfer of the capital of Ghana from Cape Coast to Accra. And I'm deliberately touching on this. Many just make that remark that it was a transfer of the capital, but that's not exactly what happened, even though it is partially true. Now, the Royal Charter of 1874 of the colonial government established Cape Coast as a seat of government, but at that time it did not cover Gold Coast. It covered Gambia, part of Nigeria, then Lagos, and remember Nigeria was later put together to become one country, Sierra Leone, and then Gold Coast. So it was essentially an HQ for West Africa, so to speak. Subsequently, the charter was amended to transfer the capital, still leaving it to Cape Coast, but restricting that capital for only Lagos and the Gold Coast as a territory. And the Gold Coast consisted of the south. So technically, Cape Coast was really never the capital of Ghana, but the capital of Gold Coast, comprising southern Ghana then, and Lagos as a territory before Lagos was combined with the rest of Nigeria to become Nigeria. Some anecdotal publications appear to think or reveal that the real transfer was not as a result of the needs for planning, but because the incessant Ashanti-Fanti war had led to the situation where Central region had become a hot spot and the colonialists wanted a more peaceful place. And indeed, the memos appear to show that the transfer was allegedly as a result of the increased resistance to colonialism which was coming from the Central region at that time, and especially the resistance to paying taxes. What I'm trying to say is that taxation and resistance to colonialism at times may affect how cities emerge, and not necessarily just the three patterns I've indicated. But having said that, we have tried to manage our cities as they develop in various ways. For example, one of the most obnoxious laws looking back is what became known as the Building Ordinance of 1904. That ordinance, strictly speaking, was designed to sell British cement. And even though the design of buildings by Brunel had long become past as a style of designing buildings, the building ordinance required that columns in Ghana for design of buildings must be as thick as you see around the Supreme Court building, because that was the only way the British could sell their cement to the colonies. It had nothing to do with the integrity and structure of the building. You may want to take a look at this as to how the designs were also influenced by things like the approach to the mosquito policy and later the mosquitoes ordinance, and how buildings had to be cantilevered in order that if the wind blew from the southwesterly, it will carry away the mosquito to the boys' quarters and bite the locals so it doesn't bite the white man who lived in the main bungalow and they had nets. These are written policies that affected how cities are designed. So the aesthetics of a city may actually be affected by how a mosquito can cause malaria. The point I'm trying to make is that many things affect how our cities are designed. One big intervention, apart from Cap 84, which I will return to, was Act 33 in 1958. That was immediately after the colonial government handed over. And that created for the first time what became known as the Town Planning Minister. We previously had the Town Planning Board, and we have returned to the Town Planning Board. Suffice to say that those who know the history of spatial planning in Ghana will tell you that between 1958 until about 2017, town planning had many different homes, including at one point being housed in the Ministry of Youth and Sports. What youth and sports have to do with hosting town planning is quite intriguing, but it's a revelation of how uncertain we are about planning, legislation, and development control. Then we came to 1988, I will jump forward, to PNDC Law 207. That's very important because PNDC Law 207 marked a new phase of attempting to regulate development at the district assembly level and actually created a decentralization approach from a new angle. It was subsequently repealed by Akufo-Addo. But from that point to date, we have had as many as 37 amendments and 37 new laws, all relating to either local governance and managing our cities and districts or town planning. Indeed, at the time, we were putting together, and I had the privilege of leading that effort, the current Act 925, the Land Use and Spatial Planning Law. There were 317 laws and legislations, each of which had a planning provision. Clearly, that is a chaotic situation, and it reflects what we do have on the ground. Even the Constitution has had provisions relating to planning. And indeed, it is one of the sources of our problem. And I'm sure many people will be surprised to hear this. Now, it empowers the president to divide the country into districts, almost as he or she pleases. And I will touch on that. It gets even worse, where the provision regarding the ability of any amendment or any attempt to divide the country into districts, whether it must be laid before Parliament or not. The Supreme Court has already ruled, not necessarily in terms of planning, but in the case of Bafo, Sarkoto, and Attorney General, on the distinction between executive instruments and legislative instruments, and how one need not be laid before Parliament for 21 working days. Essentially, what I'm saying is that since the law empowers the president to create districts by executive instruments, it need not be laid before Parliament. And the power is very pervasive. And I will review how that power has affected what has happened to us over the years. Now, if you drill down from the Constitution down to the law that sought to create the enforcement of the Constitution, particularly under 462 and 936 as we have it now, it says that in the president's attempt to create a district, the president may direct the Electoral Commission to consider the following and advise the president. 1, in the case of a district, that there is a minimum of 75,000 people. 2, in the case of a municipality, there is a minimum of 95,000 people. And in the case of a metropolis, 250,000 people. These are all minimum. And that the district or the metropolis to be created has geographical contiguity and economic viability, and that the area can provide basic infrastructure and other developmental needs from, quote, the monetary, I'm sure they meant, the lawmaker must have meant fiscal, but he uses the word monetary, and other resources generated in the area. Question, what has the Electoral Commission got to do with this? Absolutely nothing. And this is not the first time I'm making this point. I've made this point over and over and over. Sadly, it is repeated in Act 936, which was passed after 925 was sought to address the situation. Now, I had occasion to consult, and I will not mention his name, but you have your guess is as good as mine, you know who I'm talking to. One of the most notable politicians of a very long standing on decentralization. And I asked him this question: to what extent did the Electoral Commission provide this? And if I recall his answer in person in a class on decentralization I sat, he did say, to it, I am not even sure we consulted the Electoral Commission. Now, the point about this that makes this absurd, and I don't mean to insult, but when the thing doesn't make sense in legal terms, we say absurd, is that the Electoral Commission's function is only in respect of people above 18. People who live in a district and the city include many people who are below 18. And therefore, this doesn't make sense. But that is the provision we have in our statutes, and we have constantly retained them. In other words, we have not maintained the goals of planning. The one interesting thing about all our acts, and I've cited 37 between 1988 and now, have maintained one word, that the goal of planning is orderly development. All the laws say so, that the law are being passed to ensure orderly development. I'm not so sure whether you see orderly development around you. When it comes to planning, one of the best definitions of law was actually given in a play written by Robert Bolt. And the introduction to that, Robert Bolt says, if society is the name we give to human behavior when it is patterned and orderly, then law is a very pattern of society. It will appear that the lawmaker knows this, and that is why the lawmaker seeks to make each of the town planning laws to develop an orderly society. So how has the society become so disorderly since we introduced town planning laws in 1904 to 2026? Increasingly disorderly. In fact, it becomes more disorderly as we advance in time. Now, one of the things that I think I must go back to has to do with something that many lawyers may find it difficult to agree with me, but I will nevertheless make that proposal. The principle of caveat emptor, a well-settled principle of law, to the best of my knowledge, should not be applied in Ghana when it comes to the development of houses and other forms of development. And that principle should be reversed to caveat vendita. Why do I say that? It is obvious that the real problem is caused by those who sell the land for all form of development, and placing the burden on the buyer to beware may actually not achieve its purpose. And that it is important to ensure that the seller is the one who ought to ensure that what he is selling is not just fit for purpose, but meets all the requirements. And that punishment to the seller should be very, very punitive, including the buyer's ability to recover all his money if the seller, consciously or unconsciously, made a mistake. It is a proposal for you to think about. But I'm talking about town planning, I'm aware. But I know everything that we develop must exist in space and must exist on land in one form or the other. That's the reason why I've gone back to that. Okay. Now, we have tried to solve our problems in many, many ways. And recently, we introduced a new form of spatial planning. This is in the current act. And the idea was to hope that things would improve. Now remember, we are coming from the place where we had such things like Act 2, which encourages people to demolish other people's development at a certain point in time on the basis of the principle of caveat emptor. But having said that, you will find that the current law has provisions that, albeit have not been fully utilized. It develops a framework on a 4-stage principle where there is a National Spatial Development Framework. And this National Spatial Development Framework is also supported by a Regional Spatial Development Framework and District Spatial Development Framework, followed by structure plans, local plans, and permits. Much as this law has been in existence for over 10 years, it's actually been more breached than enforced. It's also not being used as a tool for strategic development of cities. And therefore, you will find that our development still goes according to the pattern where utilities like water and electricity rather chases development and not the other way around. So the sites are not serviced. And as a result, it is only when you develop, then the utilities come to you. So that access to health centers and education centers and the ministries are also not aligned to development of housing. So if you take Accra as an example, 66% of all trips in the morning leads to the Central Business District. I will be asking the question shortly, what exactly is the Central Business District? Because it used to be the place within the ring road. Then it was expanded to the place within the immediate precincts of the ring road. I have not checked whether there is a formal redefinition of it. So pardon my ignorance. But it will appear that now in Accra, we've got several CBDs. But having said that, where you have a large number of trips going to the CBD, it is important that mass transport options be put in place to ensure that especially the poor are taken care of. In any well-managed city, you have mass transit that takes care of people who either want to hurry up or cannot afford to own their own cars. So that once everybody is taken care of, or the large number of people are taken care of, the others can take all their time. But we seem to do the reverse, forcing almost everybody to use a car or to use Uber. Mind you, the same space occupied by 3 cars is exactly the same space occupied by 1 bus. But whereas a bus will take about 60 people, the 3 cars will take a maximum of 15 people. I have led several studies in the past in my former life on transportation where we took data regarding the occupancy ratio of vehicles. I can see Hesse here. He's been my partner in many of those. At my last check, the occupancy ratio of cars in Ghana was less than 2. In other words, even if we were to take the 3 cars, you will not have more than 6 people occupying the same space. And this particularly is in a country where the amount of space in the city devoted to roads is lesser than the average that we will find in other cities. And this also is not to talk about the other nuisance like beggars on the streets and many other things that I do not want to talk about. And again, I will skip the issue of disposal of waste in gutters, etc. All of it create challenges in our city. I will also skip the issue of aesthetics. Nevertheless, an important point that we need to deal with. We cannot talk about the cities in Ghana without talking about the chaos of mobility, and it's important that we emphasize mobility. The reason is very simple. Humans, by their nature, like to connect with each other, and they will connect either physically or through other means. And at times, the relationship between where we live and where we work is such that there is a distance, and as a result, we need to commute. So, the ability to commute is a very important part of each city. But what have we done to ourselves? When I was young, among the many places in Ghana I have lived was Ekendita Krade and Accra. And I used to go to secondary school in Fijai, and I would stand by the roadside at 7:15 a.m. Bus 1A will come at 7:15, never failed for all the years that I was a day student before I went to the boarding house. And in 15 minutes, I knew I would be at our junction. And in 5 to 10 minutes, I would be at the assembly hall. And by 8 a.m., you will be in class. And it was bus 1A. if you lived somewhere around Circle, like some of us did years ago, you could take bus number 11 and go to Opera. And in those days, if you closed from school at 12 o'clock and you didn't want your parents to know, you will go and watch 12:15 at Opera, which we used to call Twe. Yeah, and you will be safely back home because the bus that will take you back home will take you back without your parents knowing. They may actually think you were in the school library studying. There was predictability. I was telling my kids recently, and they couldn't believe that we have had all this within Accra and within Kumasi and within Takoradi. The predictability vanished. Even aside the public transport, the private transport was also predictable. We had buses like King's Theatre and King of Kings, for those of you old enough to remember. And they were also numbered, and we knew when they come and when they go. This is before the government even further intervened in places like City Express, Green Line, Blue Line, etc. In early 2000, I had occasion to debate one politician who was claiming that the double-decker buses that was introduced were coming to Ghana for the first time. And I told him I thought he knew better. Even though I wasn't very old then, I must have been a toddler. I understand that we had double-decker buses in the 60s, named after one Auntie Dede, and distinguished between Dede Ashekresha and the ordinary Dede. I do not know the difference and why it was named after them. But let's move on. The important point is that mobility was predictable. And it's also important that mobility must take care of the urban poor, because they tend to live in the peripheries and they are the ones who troop to the CBD much more than any other. And they come through these corridors and the trotros and bicycle paths. A whole bicycle path was designed 50 kilometers around Accra. I was part of the team. The bicycle path do exist, but nobody is able to use them. I've seen one member in the audience opening her eyes. Yes, I was part of the team that designed that bicycle path, because people have parked on it and it has become shops and even trotro stations, so you cannot identify it. But we borrowed money from the World Bank to design these bicycle paths, which money I am sure either we are paying or our children will be paying. All cities thrive on the ability to identify corridors. And these corridors are the arterial places where vehicles move, and after that, they are then distributed through smaller networks. And it doesn't matter whether these corridors are run by underground trains or by trams or by buses. They nevertheless must run and move people. For those of you who know London, just imagine London without the underground and the buses. It's not possible. Now, a city which underrates the importance of managing its transport clearly does not intend to function properly. I've already talked about the lack of pattern. What happens is that we mistake the development of roads for transportation. The two are totally different. One develops the infrastructure, the other allows it to operate, and the infrastructure must relate to how it is operated. That is what we are not doing. So, for example, the engineers here know that they don't design roads without taking traffic turning counts, without doing OD surveys to know where people are going. What is missing, for example, is a conscious effort of traffic assignment in Accra, in Kumasi, Takoradi. Now, what is traffic assignment for those who may not know? It is a conscious effort to move traffic from one mode to another, or even within modes. So, for example, because Accra-Kumasi road is bad, there are many flights now going to Kumasi. People voluntarily assigned from road to air. If you created a tram on the Medina to Accra corridor, or if you painted one of the lanes red to make it a dedicated bus lane at peak hour, and if the buses on it are neat, people will voluntarily assign from their cars and move to the buses. This happens in many cities. But we've done things even worse. We've actually allowed politics to influence everything. And in this country, politics is everything. Now, there are two things we're talking about. One is the GPRT Constitution, particularly look at Article 21 to 25 if you have the chance. That has a prescription of something called scale. which long and short simply means the vehicle that is loading. Now, every transport of every mode whatsoever relies on something called load factor. In other words, the percentage of people you have in that enables you break even. But in Ghana, because of the power of the unions, these buses have to be full before it moves beyond the break-even point. Once that enables them to cover their costs, unfortunately, because of congestion and because we are not managing the roads, only building roads, what has happened is that the trip frequencies have reduced. I can tell you for a fact that the trip frequency of the average trotro between Accra and Tema used to be 6 in the 80s, dropped to 3. I am not sure any trotro is doing more than 3 to this day. In other words, the big load factor has the disadvantage of reducing your trip frequencies because you are staying at one place, there is no quality, and the people are queuing, waiting to go home, with its consequential effect on productivity and congestion. As for street furniture, by which I'm referring to bus stops and the rest, forget it. There is more inimical thing to talk about, even though it's repealed. But its effect we are still grappling with. It's a law called PNDC 317. That law empowered the GPRTU to also manage terminals on behalf of the assemblies and created a situation where the GPRTU at that time had a force that could arrest other commercial vehicles. They used to wear blue uniform. Much as that law has been repealed by Act 863, the Road Traffic Acts, its effect is that the assemblies have never been fully able to regain control of the terminals. And that is one reason why people may be queuing by the roadside waiting for buses, but the buses are inside the trotro terminals waiting to be full. It's simply a matter of inefficient management. And you have a situation also where less and less public buses have been put in the system. So there is one undeniable conclusion. The failure of development control among the cities, the absence of enforcement, and then the multiplier effect of the politics. This is making everything worse and increasing the disorder. The effect on this, again, I must emphasize, are multiplier. It affects tourism. It affects how we use infrastructure. It affects public safety because, for example, because of how our development is not well structured, in the case of emergency, NADMO, fire, and the police may not be able to access places. Recently, the numbering of houses have become very, very intense, and naming of streets. That's quite good. But I will never forget, during the time we were doing the studies for 925, I went to a house in Pokwasi, and it was house number 12.5E. I have still not understood how a house could have 12.5E. But it will appear that they were numbered according to the plots, not according to the houses. So, for example, we are currently at number 8, Dr. Isaac, but the very next house is actually number 12. And if you move 2 blocks away, you will meet number 44. These are all examples of how the city has not been properly managed. And it affects our ability to collect revenue and the high incidence of revenue losses, both to the district assemblies and the state, as well as to the utility providers such as Ghana Water Company and Electricity Company. Let me move quickly to how cities affect our brands, which is where I started with. As I indicated, there are many who, for example, will mention a city like London and simply understand that it means he's going to UK. And that is very common. If I say I'm going to Lagos, you must understand I'm going to Nigeria. I don't need to explain beyond that. So cities have an impact on the brand of countries. Let us take an example of what brand means. But as we know, it is simply what exists in your mind about anything, and I will keep it that simple. So if I were to talk about Takoradi, the harbor city, the sailors, and the mining congregation of miners, and the oil city should come to your mind. If I were to talk about Kumasi, it being almost in the middle of the country, not quite in the middle because Kentampo is the middle, should come to mind, but as a trading hub, places like KJTR should come to mind. A concentration of people. Tamale, once described as the fastest growing metropolis in West Africa, should come to mind as a key connector to landlocked countries. And these are all cities. Then Tema, which Mr. Moderator, who started as MC, talked about, where I'm still not tired of leading the campaign about Tema as the center of the world. And it is center of the world, literally. For those who may not know, and just so I make it very clear, Tema is exactly 5 degrees above the equator, but it's the last inhabitable land where the Greenwich Meridian enters before it goes into the Antarctica. No other inhabitable land exists in between that intersection. So it is the only place you can legitimately claim that it is at the center of the world. And this used to be the case in Nkrumah's days. Meridian Hotel, and it was called Meridian for that purpose, had a room called the Zero Room, which charged very high amounts for people staying there. And I understand if you convert it to today's currency, it's about £1,000+ pounds a day. Having said that, current development in GPS, we actually went to try and realized that it was a few degrees off the zero. However, we made money in those days. A lot has to do with what exists in your mind. Now, the Presbyterian Church of Tema exists on the 0 degrees, and I've said this several times. If you check the itinerary of many, quote and unquote, big people who come to Ghana, including the 2 times Queen Elizabeth, may her soul rest in peace, and her husband both came to Ghana. They both worshipped at that Presbyterian center. It's in the itinerary. They are not Presbyterians. There must be some attachment to the center of the world. And our inability to take advantage to make it religious tourism beats my imagination. Nothing annoys me more than Ghana constantly, including borrowing $96 million at one point to brand itself as a gateway to Africa. I have said over and over, if God puts you at the center and you want to call yourself a gate, you have a problem. But that's what we did. Now, why is this relevant to this? It's relevant because if you actually manage to brand Tema as the center of the world, and this has got planning implications. For example, it is possible for the planning authorities to ensure that the entire trajectory of the Greenwich Meridian does not have development on it, and it is marked. And there are places you can stand where you can take pictures and you will be in both in the eastern and western hemisphere at the same time. Do you think I'm imagining? Just go off the coast. Naval vessels do this ceremony to this day because it's the only place in the world where you can be in both the east and the west at the same time off our coast. And there are 5,428 of ships that cross our coast every single year. The data is available if you want to check. Some of us have done quite a lot of work in this, but let's skip it. The point I'm making is that the multiplier effect of a brand of a city is very important. And if you succeeded in branding Tema as the center of the world, that brand affects Ghana. It's actually is a reason why I chose the topic. Because cities are centers of prosperity, and centers of prosperity in our case should be existing at the center of the world. Having said that, we should not overlook the fact that cities must also be livable. So if we don't deal with things like Galamsey, the threat of water being contaminated as a result of Galamsey may affect how people view our cities. It doesn't matter how much you brand your city. If your water is deemed to be contaminated, it will affect you. So this has a holistic approach, but nevertheless, I wanted to emphasize the brand effect. One underlying factor, which I mentioned earlier, is the politicization of everything, including planning. Let me ask a question. If you have the answer, you can give me the answer. Who is the mayor of Accra? And show by hand if you know. Now, I don't know the name of the mayor of Accra, and I'm speaking on the issue of cities. Which part of Accra does he supervise? That's even more confusing. But there were days when if I mention E.T. Mensah, Akainete, Ishmaela Ite, Nasnunu Amatofio, or Okobandapoi, you knew exactly who these people were and what they did. and they affected your daily life. One of them even once brandished some check, claiming the check was coming to solve our, as it were, our, what do you call it? Sanitation. No. It's sanitation related. The water, yes, and all those problems. But the underground drains, that never happened. But these were powerful people. And in cities, mayors are supposed to be powerful, rightly so. But I will explain to you why you don't know the mayor of Accra, and I don't either. And frankly, I don't care. Yes, this is not because not caring is not important. It is because we have made them irrelevant. We've made them very, very irrelevant without realizing so. And this is not the doing of this or any particular government. I will reveal it shortly. The next question is, how much revenue does Accra generate? If you have the answer, let me know. Now, how many people live in Accra? That you may know from the statistical service. But once you answer that question, my next question will be, when you say Accra, exactly what are you referring to? Greater Accra? And what is the CBD, which is a question. How does Uber fix the charges in Accra and Kumasi? Is it because the area is zoned and a particular zone is more intense? Or is simply the decision of Uber based on Google's analytics, which determine how Uber charges us? In a well-planned city, that cannot be left to Uber as an operator. It is the zoning of the city that determines how they may charge, not the reverse. What about the GPRTU and the so-called floating drivers? And when I talk about GPRTU, I do mean all private operators, including cooperative, Ghana Road Haulage Association, and what collectively became known as the Ghana Road Transport Coordinating Council. I don't want to talk about that for now. Alaji is here. But if during discussion time, the occasion comes, we will talk about it. Having said that, you will notice that our National Development Planning Commission also omitted the special planning component. Now, that has been resolved by Act 925. Much worse, for a significant period in our life, KNUST, which trains special planners, also stopped the training of special planners. I understand they have resumed now. So at the point this country had 168 districts, there were only 71 qualified special planners in the country. Now we have 271, and we will talk shortly about how we arrived at that before I conclude, because I'm talking about politicization. So the attempt to address the absurdity within the legal space has been going on. Now, I'm returning to the point where I talked about the Electoral Commission being assigned the responsibility of determining the geographical contingency, economic, and I'm quoting, economic viability of the area, the ability of an area to provide basic infrastructure, and any other developmental needs from the monetary and other resources generated in the area. As you all will agree with me, I don't know how the Electoral Commission will do that. But having said that, you will notice that the provision in the law omits the need for maps, for orthophoto maps. In other words, the president can create districts without maps, without defining the area with a clear map, without defining the need for social services such as education, hospital, and the distance of facilities, existing infrastructure, and without defining how the spatial development and transportation will be planned. These are the things that affect cities and how cities are managed. Right. Now, let me give you some data which is surprising. Between 1970 and 2024, this is how we have increased our districts. And I said every government is culpable. We had 65 in 1970. In 1988, we increased them to 110. And I was referring to when we didn't have actual spatial planners. In 2006, we added 45 in 1988. In 2006, we added 28 to go to 138. In 2012, in 2008, we added 32 more to go to 170 districts. In 2012, we added 46 to go to 216. In 2018, just 6 years later, we added 38 to go to 254. In 2019, we added 7 to go to 261. Then in 2024, we added more to go to the current figure that we have with 33 as districts, and the rest, with 33 districts further elevated to municipal and metropolitan areas. That's exactly what we have done. Just cutting up the districts. Now, the growth of Kumasi, Takrady, Sekendita, Tamale have gone through this background over the years, where we have just kept dividing them and creating more jobs for politicians. But the jobs for the politicians is actually not the problem. I said I was going to return to chiefs. Each of these districts have been demanded by chiefs. It is chiefs who demand that the districts are created. I once had occasion to speak at a forum where a chief was chairperson and was complaining about the town planning issues, etc. And I said, Nana, you are the people who demand the creation of districts and regions, and that is what causes the problem. So currently, for example, in Accra, we have 29, of which 23 are municipal and metropolitan assemblies, and it has moved from 3 in 82 all the way to the 29 that we do have now. We added 13 alone in 2018. If you want to know how GAPTI has not worked, you may be surprised to find out that GAPTI was designed with 13 metropolitan assemblies, each of whom signed the agreement. But by the time GAPTI was to roll out, the assemblies had been increased to 27 and 29. So when we divide our country into districts, we have no idea how it affects our inability to function. Takrady and Western region is no different. I will skip because of time. But from 1946, where we had simply Sekeni Takrady Council, we have moved all to the point by 2019, where we had divided them almost to the point that we actually took 9 out of the 23 districts and created a new region. Now, you will notice that it is only when it comes to dividing the country into districts that the two parties don't argue. If you will notice, the decision to create more regions was actually jointly campaigned for by both political parties. So it's important that planners take this into account. The same thing has been done to Tamale, where from 1975, we only had West Zagomba district created as a district assembly, and then we kept multiplying it. As of 2018, we had Sanarigu elevated to municipal status. And then after the referendum, Savannah region was created. And the northern region has had, Tamale as a municipality has had also been subdivided, just like many other regions. Now, what has been done before we deal with what should be done? I've already mentioned that we created a National Special Development Framework, the Regional Special Development Framework, the District Special Development Framework, the Structure Plan, local plans, and schemes. So these do exist. The problem with Ghana is not absence of laws, it's failure to enforce the law. We do have a land use and spatial planning authority with everything that matters, and therefore I'm not going to go into the details. The most important thing is that there is enough, even if we wanted to enforce what we already have. So in drawing to a conclusion, let us ask, what is the way forward? The first recommendation I have is to utilize what we already have. And we do have a lot, and I've already talked about Act 925. There are certain interesting things Act 925 introduced which we have not actually enforced. And when I say we, I mean including myself as a people. One is the introduction of a certificate for habitable dwelling. Now, that certificate distinguished what used to be called zoning certificate. And zoning certificate under the law is now restricted to a zone properly so called. In other words, land above 1,000 acres or more. So in order to dispose of land, the law now requires that the person disposing of exhibits that that building has a certificate of habitable dwelling. It's a caveat bendito principle. Unfortunately, that has not been adequately reflected in the land law, which came after the Land Use and Spatial Planning Act. But nevertheless, it remains enforceable. Indeed, in Act 936, the Local Governance Act, it says that any provision which is inconsistent with 925 should rather become redundant. So 925 has a lot of power that we are not enforcing. And the certificate of habitable dwelling is very important. Why is this important? There are many homes in many of our cities without, for example, public toilets. And open defecation is one of the things that reduces the quality of life of our cities. Why should anybody build a house without toilets in the house? You'll be surprised to hear, if you don't know that already, that we have borrowed money several times from the World Bank to give to landlords to put toilets in their houses who didn't build the toilets in the first place, I can bet you that the houses never got the toilet supplied, even though we are paying the money back. So that certificate of habitable dwelling is something worth enforcing. 2, there is a requirement for consultation with the public, and the provision and formats for consultation are all spelled out and has actually been reinforced in the law. This is also not being taken advantage of by the public. 3, for the first time in the country, each district assembly is required to have a public data room, and the law specifies what is it that must go into the public data room, including proposed buildings, designs, etc. And the law empowers private citizens to compel the assembly to follow their own master plans, etc. And there is a time limit for the display in the public data room. Maybe the public is not aware that all these provisions are there. One of the purposes of this lecture is to draw attention to things like this. Next recommendation is that we should see the cities as a strategy. Now, a strategy is different from delivering projects. We can deliver many projects, but unless the projects are part of a conscious effort for a strategy, we will not achieve the multiplier effect. So yes, I agree clearly with major projects that each government is doing, but can we also align them to a strategy? So for example, if you return to my recommendation of enforcing the brand of Tema as a center of the world, and again, that is a whole complete lecture on its own, it becomes a strategy issue where, for example, the development of the Terminal 3 at the harbor would then have included an ecological component where the tourism component will have been included. It will not be a denial of a container terminal, but a container terminal where people can take pictures at the center of the world. That is what a strategy does. It is also important that we understand that Accra as a whole is part of the so-called mega cities of Africa, i.e. cities which are 5 million people or more. And as a result, that itself can attract quite a lot of infrastructure and funding. And being center of the world gives you the ability to be equidistant with the rest of the world, and therefore can easily make you a logistics hub. And that is something we can do if we want to create our cities as centers of prosperity. Another important factor is that Accra and Tema and Takoradi, 3 of the cities mentioned in my list, sit on the so-called West Africa megapolis. For the avoidance of doubt, megapolis is big metropolitan areas within separate countries where it at times it is difficult to determine whether they fall in different countries. A typical example is when you are moving from Amsterdam to Belgium. Essentially, those who predict the future believe that Abidjan, Lagos, and Accra corridor is one such megapolis, which is the reason why the so-called Abidjan-Lagos corridor project is, being implemented. And if 60% of that corridor is sitting in Ghana, and you have 3 of your cities along that corridor, and we are not taking advantage of it, then our planning is not strategic enough. It is only projects related. Because it creates many things, including an energy hub and transshipment point, which will affect both our ports. It creates financial centers, entertainment centers. It makes better use of our airports. Now, to do this, all of us need to create much awareness about the menace of the fragmentations which I have blamed on our chiefs and our politicians. Because the more you fragment, the more difficult it becomes to manage our cities properly. Those of you who may old enough will remember that we used to have something called ATMA, Accra Tema Metropolitan Area. Then we moved to Greater Accra, Gamma. Then we moved to AMA. Then we created Laduma. Then Lejokuku. Then the rest is history. And I asked, where is AMA? And many couldn't answer the question. This is not new. Many countries have tried this before and have done redistricting by consolidating. I had the occasion to write a paper recommending consolidation and recommending what I call the greater metropolis approach. That even if we are afraid to merge the districts back, we should have a situation where certain districts have joint planning boards, which is provided for in the law. And then we can treat them as one. At the best, they can have a chair of the district assemblies. And we have to recognize that these, when they come together, that is when they have the real mind. Some of you may not know that the city of London, again, I'll take that example, which has many more people living there than Accra, has got 2 mayors. One mayor is the one we call the mayor of London. There's another mayor called the mayor of the city of London, who manages just a 1 mile squared territory. The whole idea of the mayor of the city of London is to promote London as a constant center for finance. So strategy is part of managing a city, and that is lacking. So far as I'm concerned, if you take our location, if you take our fact that we are part of a growing megapolis and you compare it to the rest of the world, there is absolutely no reason why Accra is not a financial hub. And we can do that by using it to stimulate several things, including the creation of infrastructure bonds, municipal bonds, green finance, listing municipal bonds, ring fencing, property rates, etc. for finance, pooling assets and property rates in a way that then take the burden off the central government and enables the assemblies and the rest to fund major projects themselves. That is when our cities will become a real business hub, trade hub, entertainment centers, etc. What are the things I see about the Ghanaian cities of the future that will make them centers of prosperity at the center of the world? I see a future where the cities are well managed, with trees where people can ride peacefully, where the cities are not fragmented like we have had. And I've already talked about the fragmentation. I don't want to continue emphasizing that. Where you have those who are using non-motorized transport in this era of energy transition can ride peacefully without fear of being hurt. There are public notices of buildings and development where motorbikes obey traffic signals and they stop, where police are visible at specific junctions, where land acquisition is not attendant with double sale if we want to develop, where permit and ownership is easy to verify online, because I can sit here and tell you who owns what property in Kigali now. I have negotiated online just knowing who owns which property, and there is no double ownership. Where the data room exists and it is utilized by citizens, where public transport is preferred as much as possible, and therefore we can use our cars for 10 years and perhaps ship them to other countries as second-hand cars as we receive them here. Where people have access to money at financial centers because the city functions and people want to bring their money here. Where property rates are a great source of income. Where the plans to develop all major projects are known to others. Where certificate of habitable dwelling is used. Where a development which is blighted can be acquired and changed in order that it fits the conforming use. Where LUSPA is more accessible. Where rent advance is not 2 years in advance, but 6 months with a 1 month or 2 month security deposit. Where connectivity is predictable, refuse is collected, the city is clean, traffic flows at bit level A to C. That means that it is not a gridlock. Where people come to see gold, because we are actually Africa's leading gold producer. And there are many cocoa places where we drink cocoa, just like you find Starbucks anywhere. And where the preamble to the Constitution is what we follow. Instead of the plenty talk about constitutionalism and Article 88 and whether Article 88 should be amended, etc. I'm a lawyer, but I get tired of those things. The real preamble to the Constitution, maybe many have never read. It says, in the exercise of our natural and inalienable right to establish a framework of government which are secure for ourselves and posterity, the blessings of liberty, equality, and opportunity and prosperity. We seem to forget the prosperity part, and we just become fixated with things which add no money to our pockets, nor prosperity to ourselves, nor the future. I believe that if we do the right thing, we can create our cities into centers of prosperity at the center of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can do better for David. I attempted to write the recommendations and the things our cities must have. I got 13. I know, David, you read about 16. I got 13. Yes, and we are getting to where we have the panel discussion. And it's 6:25. If you just tuned in to JoyNews on TV and also on YouTube, we are bringing you the JoyNews and the Amalgam of Professional Body Speakers series. And today's topic is Centers of Prosperity at the Center of the World. How can we manage our cities better to stimulate economic growth? It's time for the panel discussion. We'll have just about 30 minutes to have the panel discussion. But before we get into the panel, let me also acknowledge some of the guests we have here. We have Planner Mohammed Al-Hassan Damba, immediate past president of the Ghana Institute of Planning. Let's acknowledge him with a round of applause, please. We have Planner Percy Anab Bukari. Planner Percy Anab Bukari. He is the president of the Ghana Institute of Planning. The current president, please. And he's here with Planner Joe. Planner Dr. Joe Aitio is also a special planner with the Ghana Institute of Planning. We have Planner Dr. Benedict Arkest. We have Planner Dr. Benedict Arkest, who is the head of plan preparation for the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authorities at the head office. He's on the panel, so as we acknowledge him, he also joins me here. Benedict, please join us in front. Please, a round of applause for Benedict Arkest. We also have Mrs. Sarah Gioglu, Spatial Planner, also with the LUSPA, and a man who will very soon be called Dr. Kofi Kekeli Amedro, Head of Research, Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority, is also here. In addition, we have other professionals here. I'll be introducing them as we go along. But at this point, I'd like to invite the president of the Ghana Institute of Architects to join us. He's also on the panel, Tony Asari. Please, let's welcome him with a round of applause. We also have the president of the Ghana Institution of Engineering. Let's welcome Engineer Ludwig Annan Hesse to join us. And David will also join us as well. Dr. David Ofosudote, senior partner for ABN David, he will also join us as well. Since we don't have a lot of time, and I know planners, engineers, architects, when we meet, precision is always key. We are going to be as precise and concise so that we manage the time. And if this were a design team, I would have started with Tony. But this is not an out-and-out building design team where the architect takes the lead. This is a national planning conversation. So I want to start with Dr. Arkest, Benedict. David has said a lot, and indeed, there's a lot also to be done. And from your perspective, from where you sit, we have special plans for every district, don't we? We do have that, right? For most districts, do we have special plans for most districts?
So it depends on the level of the plan. As David presented, currently we have a 3-tier planning system where we have the spatial development framework at the top. We also have structure plans and the local plans.
Yeah.
But for local plans, which are 5-year plans, that guides the neighborhoods and towns in terms of where houses should be, where schools should be, where roads should be. For those ones, most of the districts have those plans. But in terms of the strategic plans, like the spatial development frameworks, the structure plans, most of the districts do not have. And that is one of the reasons or one of the things that is contributing to spatial governance and planning in Ghana, because the government, or I would say the local governance system, or those in charge of the districts assemblies, like the mayors that he was referring to, they have not invested in spatial planning and governance. That is the reason why most of the districts do not have these strategic plans, which are meant to correct some of the problems that we have inherited since the colonial era. Because if you look at those times, because of the way the planning system was couched, it resulted in spatial inequalities for most of our towns and cities, because only few areas were declared as planning areas, which resulted in concentration of population in these areas to the neglect of the other towns and cities. So over the years, we are recovering from development that is chasing planning to try to correct some of these imbalances. And even districts that try to prepare these plans, they just tick the boxes, but they don't really actually understand or see how these spatial plans can be a strategy to correct some of the planning problems or the problems that we have as a country in terms of using planning as a political and social leverage to economic and to promote economic development. So this is my initial thoughts.
My initial question was supposed to enable me to ask my proper question, but you've answered it already. So I'll come to you, Tony. We are looking for a fit for purpose system. David's recommendations basically gives us a sense of what a fit for purpose system must do for us, where I wake up in the morning and I really don't have to think about having an AC in my home, because you have trees all around and they will cool the air. And my windows, if I design them very well, I have cross ventilation, and my electricity bill will drop by 60% because ACs don't work in my home. He's mentioned the low fragmentation, walkable and cyclable communities, easy land acquisition, he's mentioned all of them. We've had these conversations for years. In 30 years, the three of you may be gone, but Benedict and I may be here.
You have to report yourself to Elvis Efre. I mean, such a prophecy at this time.
What must we do now to have fit for purpose cities that stimulate economic growth? What three things must change immediately so that when you become ancestors, right, you look down upon us to see that at least there's been some change?
Thank you very much, Kojo. When David finished his talk, I was saying at the back there that I don't know why we were even clapping, because I think the whole situation should rather make us sad and contemplative instead of trying to applaud, because basically there is very little to applaud with the way we have run our system. First and foremost, our institutions are failing. I don't think that we should be diplomatic about it. We cannot garnish it in any way. The institutions are failing. Coordination is failing. Systems that should set vision, setting vision as to what we want to create is failing. But there is every indication that we have the capacity. But there is some catalyst that should link all these things that isn't actually working. I mean, those gathered in this room, we've been talking for a very long time. And so we ask ourselves that what is missing? When Senegal decided to create Damnendio, the new capital, we got the opportunity to do a bit of work. In fact, when I walked into the Department of Urbanism in Dakar, I realized that they had actually tried to pick the best brains they could have, and in the hall where they exhibit how they want the cities to be, they had architects from Spain, from Mauritania, from Algeria, from France, and everybody had done some kind of master planning. We had the opportunity to do a bit of work up to about 100 acres. What we did was to plan every street, every building, where landscape should be, where building heights would be, specific building heights, walkways, cycles, mosques, everything. And we had to do a thorough presentation of how that whole area was going to be. We showed 3Ds. We had questions from engineers, architects. It's solid peer review. And so by the time they said they had accepted it, they took it. They didn't let us progress with that. The local architects picked it up. It became their job. The whole cycle of thinking through it, thinking through designs and making sure that we want to create an enclave that is enjoyable. We get up, we all travel, we see very nice places. Why is it that we fail to create that? And that is the failure of the institutions that I'm talking about. And it is important that we step back and find out, what are we sacrificing? And we are sacrificing a lot of these things on our political platform. The sure way of killing everything, including our technical abilities, objectivity, is politicizing everything. The moment we leave planning, technical expertise, engineering, and all these things in the hands of the politicians, we somehow polarize and become incapacitated, as if we just don't think. And that is one of the things that I worry about.
But Tony, before you go on, I have moderated a lot of these events with a lot of the institutions, like the professional bodies as we have now.
Yes.
And we always commit to participate in the public conversations, in engaging politicians, in engaging national leadership. But from what I said, I don't see it. For example, when we have public conversations on infrastructure, our cities, planning, it ends up being left to the politicians, and sometimes, I say this loosely, to the lawyers, right? So in the morning, if there's a conversation about transport within the city and traffic, you are likely to hear people whose training is there talking about this topic which is here, because most of you professional bodies also don't take a keen interest in the national conversations. That's my personal observation. So when you talk about the institutions, who are you talking about? Are you talking about all of us?
Yes, you see, the one of the easiest way of gathering information when we have to do these things is to be able to do stakeholder engagement. In Ghana, what I have seen is that it is just a box we tick. I had a conversation with the NDPC recently, and I was a staff of the NDPC, and I was making this point that if you have, for instance, a national infrastructure plan discussion, and you say that, well, you've written a letter to the Ghana Institute of Architects and the Ghana Institute of Engineering, and that they were represented. How were they represented? How do you gather information? It's about data. It's about technical input. If you pick the Ghana Institute of Engineering alone, you're dealing with structural engineers, transportation engineers, waste management engineers, electrical engineers, mechanic, whoever. I mean, so many of these engineers who actually represented. How did you gather the idea? How did you gather their input? How did it change? Why don't you pick it and pick the idea and engage a sector and thoroughly engage them such a way that you can actually see how these inputs affect? So the institutional failure that we have is basically, I mean, I don't know, maybe from some funding agency, that we have boxes to tick. So we have met with the engineers, met with the architects. We had the architects insisted on, there was something about this EPA and some of these green technology issues, and greening Ghana issues, and we insisted that we wanted to have a solid representation to be able to engage them. We did it ourselves. We spent a full day with them. A lot of the decisions changed. You see, so it's one. The second point is this, that we have structures that do not change. Look, I was talking to Kekeli behind there about the public data room that David talked about. I don't know whether this has been in the law for a very long time. I don't know how many of us have gone to the public data room and what we are going to look out for. I was up in the north there somewhere, and I went to one public data room. Just one small map sitting there. There's nothing there. But how do we even invite members of the community to come and engage? So that's the other thing. Has to do with whether when we have a law backing the assembly and they do not have the capacity, whether we should allow them to work. Let me maybe give examples. So let me be a bit selfish about architecture. Assuming I am in Tisala West somewhere and the assembly hasn't got an architect, why should we allow them to review architectural drawings? Who is reviewing it? What is the basis of the review? So we have a system that is dysfunctional, and we keep on funding it and giving it money for it to work. If today we decide that if there are no architects and engineers, I was speaking to somebody from the Ghana Boundary Commission this morning. Let's find out from the assemblies how many of the assemblies even have geodetic engineers to be able to ensure that the translation of the planning to the ground is done properly. They don't have it, but somehow they get somebody to go and try and lay the road is here and the drainage is here. After 2 weeks, they will come and cut the road. The road where after Ibrahim's house, if you are turning towards the WAEC exams hall, last 2 weeks they came and excavated the place. When they finished, they just poured the sand there and they left. Somebody's gone. You've seen it.
Yeah.
You know? And so the aspect, who is following up? So there are issues with development control and capacity and all of those things. So what I'm talking about in terms of institutional failure is, and it's not, I mean, I'm not taking out the professional bodies out, because we focus on our daily bread. Everybody is focusing on their daily bread and the nation is suffering. There is a structural failure which we must address. Somehow the most common phrase that we are here in this country is, the problem is. How many of us say the solution is? Thank you.
Thank you. That was Tony Asari, President of the Ghana Institute of Architects. I'll come to Engineer Hesse. For most Christians, your first introduction to God will be an introduction to his engineering activities before his legal activities. In the beginning, the world was without form, and he said this and that. He became, pardon? Later he gave them the 10 Commandments on the mountain. And then there is the medical, and then even the entertainment. You know, when Jesus turned water into wine and the people drank the wine, they said it was so good. So they were happy. So he has different functions. And so we were created in this image. In fact, I'm being a bit religious here. As the president of the Ghana Institution of Engineers, maybe this was a question I was attempting to ask Tony, which he dodged a little. And I'll come back to you again. We say that we are not building Ghana the way we want, and it's led by the politicians. And we see groups, organized groups in certain sectors, who actually are strong public advocates. This week, Kolebu doctors laid down their tools because they felt some things were not being done right. In fact, in 2009, junior doctors at Confanoche went on strike for about 3 weeks because water was not flowing, the oxygen wasn't flowing, they were losing patients. The minister then had to fly to Kumasi with 2 million cedis of cash to come and fix the problem. It's all advocacy. But we've sat here as built industry professionals, as planners, as the conscience of the actual development we want. But we not engage as much. So this transportation issue, David explained how he used to travel. There was predictability in Takoradi, in Accra. We don't have that now. How do we, as professionals, solve that problem by becoming the voices that redirect the political energy and public financing to solve the problem?
Thank you very much. One of the problems we have is, hello. Yeah. It's when you talk, then you are beaten into silence. When you talk, you are beaten into silence. And the system stays the way it is. So, and Tony mentioned that you also have to leave. And so the collective that should be loud keeps quiet so that you can protect your daily bread. But let's come to where the real problems lie. We are professionals and we have professional associations. We have not signed a contract to as professional associations voted for by people to make Ghana good. There are people who came to seek our votes and promise us that they'll make Ghana good. And there's a public sector that has been set up to help do this. Now, the public sector, from my point of view, has surrendered its power to the politician almost completely. So now, our members, who are professionals, who are working in the public sector, are not able to do and produce what we have been trained to do and produce. And this is the crux of the matter. 2016, we got Koreans to bring Korean money to come and do a transport master plan for Accra. They call it Koika, 2016. And if you read that report, it tells you how the transport system should, and actually had an initial 5-year plan, which should have ended in 2021 or so. And it tells you that by this time, all the major roads in Accra should have been running BRT systems. And we should have been studying for an underground transport system between Accra and Central and Makina.
That will not be flooded.
Now look at all the road projects we are doing in Accra. Have we factored the fact that we said we should have a BRT system into it when we paid money to do that plan? And not a single bit of that plan has been factored into any of the road development projects we are doing. And this is something which was paid for.
So the new roads we are building don't have any plans for...
They don't make any reference to BRT. There's no BRT thinking in any of them in Accra. Absolutely zero. So what's the essence of that? 2, if you read the Quaker report, it tells you that the essence of transport planning is the data, the demand should come from land use. Now, they didn't find proper land use plans and information that they could use as the basis of their modeling for traveling in Accra. So instead of doing a 20 years plan, that was what they signed up to do. They said, probably let's just do 5, because 5, you can use some of the evidence that you see with your eyes around to put something together. But when you start going to 20 and things, we don't have that long-term plan to do it. Look, the whole of Ghana, there's no traffic data collection system in Ghana. Zero. In 1996, we did the transport plan for Accra. Accra was zoned. The demand models were set up. Nobody maintained that demand model. They are all dead. Nobody knows where they are now. And now they will not be relevant because Accra has changed significantly. So the serious thing is that collectively, we are not doing what we say. You see, I was working in public sector. I was involved in a lot of things, building bicycle paths and all those things. We did all those things. Now, the conclusion I came to is that whatever we sit down to plan, we don't do it. Everything we do is what comes out of pragmatic solutions. Oh, there's a problem here, firefighting. Go and build this road, go and do that. But what you plan never gets done. And when all those planning that is done in Ghana is paid by somebody else, we as Ghana, when we are doing our own budget from consolidated fund, we never put money aside for planning. We only borrow money to plan.
Which we still pay for anyway.
Yeah. But sometimes it looks like free money. You see, so we go and so we've got to change the story. And then for me, the last thing I want to say, and it's come from the gerrymandering of assembly system, Accra moving from 4 assemblies to 29. Now, how do you do the metropolitan planning or the city planning? Because you have so many assemblies. If you want to do a BRT from Dodowa to CBD, you must be going through like 6 or 7 assemblies. Who will be responsible for planning the whole route? Who? Including the road, infrastructure, the operational systems that will go on it. And 90% of the traffic in Accra travels on these arterial roads. Now, why can't we do what Metropolitan London did? Or you go to Curitiba, they did. They set up a system. It can be a governance system, it can be an administrative system, whatever it is. But it should be properly funded, it should be properly controlled, it should have all the political links to be able to do this. To manage a mega city. Outside the small assemblies, 935 provides for the assemblies to be able to come together to do this. But we know that we try GAPT and it doesn't work. So if you don't create an animal in itself, but you want to rely on the assemblies, then who funds it? Unless there's a World Bank money that is going to fund that coming together, do you think any of the assemblies are going to put their own money together to create that animal? So we have to create it legally for the mega city structure. What we call Accra Metropolitan now is not, it's Accra Municipal. Let's call it that. And now redefine what metropolitan means, that a bunch of municipalities come together to form the metropolis, and we give that metropolis its own responsibilities, that it can manage some of these mega services that we are talking about. If you talk about the Odo, who manages the Odo? If we want to walk along from Tesano to Choco, and you want to...
It's managed by the Ministry of Water Resources, Works and Housing.
So these are the... So for me, one critical thing that we need to look at is, because we've broken down into the municipals, it will be difficult to reverse. But let's learn from other cities. Curitiba, Bogota, London, they've done it. And they put structures in place, and they are running systems that are working. Transport for London is running the whole Transport for London.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are probably 50 boroughs or something in London, like our assemblies, that are managing other things.
Yeah.
But the greater metropolitan is working because he has his own responsibilities that he's saying to. And he can then use his powers to ensure that the municipals will do certain things so that the mega city will work whilst they manage their own micros.
Thank you, Engineer.
Thank you very much.
I'll come back to you, Akest, and take a quick word from David. We have 7 minutes with our on-air audience. So I'll take a word from you, Akest, and go. When we finish, those of us in here will then have a family meeting and find a way forward for Ghana, which we will condense into articles and reports and further radio discussions to ensure that we shape Ghana the way we want. So in 2 minutes here, if we should change something tonight, if something must happen for those our children who would have beer with us in 30 years to enjoy beer in a proper environment, what is the one thing that we are not doing that we must start doing tonight to make our cities better to stimulate economic growth?
I will come from the point, because I'm a planner, I want to say that planning is a science. So that's why when you go to planning school, our degrees that is awarded to us is Bachelor of Science, which means that before you come out with a plan, you've diagnosed the problem, you do investigation, you come out with scenarios, then the outcomes of the plan means that it is solving a problem. And there are many who think that planning should be apolitical, but planning rather should be political, because the outcomes of the plans that we prepare must. Well, what I always tell people is that if a politician does not see that the outcomes of the plans that you prepare will help to solve a problem that he has promised the electorate, he's not going to implement those plans. Yes, so one solution that I will propose is that the professional bodies like the Ghana Institute of Planning, the Ghana Institute of Engineering, Ghana Institution of Architects, they should do a lot more of advocacy to let the politicians know the outcomes of the plans that all of these professional bodies, how those plans can help promote their governance, promote whatever plans that they have for the people. One example that I will give is that in the UK, any government that comes reform the planning system to promote whatever strategies that they promise the electorate. That is the problem that we are having in Ghana. That's why some political parties say they don't believe in long-term plans, because it's there for 4 years. You are talking about 20 years. He wants something to be done in the next 4 years to show the electorate that this is what I have done. And most of those of us in the public service, maybe because one of the senior mentioned that there are some things that if you say, maybe you might be targeted. But the professional bodies can take up that advocacy role to really conscientize them, let them know that if you do this, these plans that we prepare can help rather sustain you in power rather than just neglecting the plan. So that is one solution that I think, if it is done right, the politicians will take planning in Ghana seriously. Thank you.
Let me take a word from David for this segment of the program, and then we will say bye-bye to our on-air and online audience and have our family meeting.
So, I mean, I need to go back to Tony, but I'll just say 3 things. And you saw I was picking my phone. I will tell you why
2
I
minutes,
picked
please.
it. Yeah, the first one is, we as a people are not different from those who become president of Institute of Architects, Institute of Engineering, etc. We are in my doctorate thesis, I described most Ghanaian elite as collectively individualistic. We are collective when it comes to funerals, outdooring, sharing beer, etc. But individualistic when it comes to taking power. So the same person who is, and I don't mean Tony, who is president of Ghana Institute of Architects or Ghana Institute of Planners, etc., or engineers, if they called him and gave him one big road contract to supervise, he will sacrifice the institution. The collectiveness is gone. That's a fact. That is a, and there are 2 presidents of engineering here. The president of the Chartered Institute of Transport and Logistics here, vice president of Institute of Planners, to which I belong, and architects. They will quickly sacrifice that institution and will not talk again. Yet the elite, and that's one reason I really recommend Amalgam for these lectures. This is the second time I'm speaking on Amalgam platform. People keep asking me, I've been talking since 1999. I have not stopped talking. And I said, that's the only thing I can do. I cannot contest election. In fact, some of us, if we contest, we won't win anyway. Because we say it as it is. The only thing I can do is talk. So we cannot sacrifice the talking. But please believe me, they listen. So rather, in respect of the institutions, I recommend that before the election, before the manifesto, you send proposals to them. They factor this into account. And after that, follow up and don't sacrifice the institution. There's a second thing. I tweeted, I tweet a lot. And that's why I was looking. I tweeted this on February 23rd, February 15, 2023. I'll read it. In handling any crisis, there are 2 types of consultations leaders undertake. Some consult widely so that they can make well-informed decisions. Others carry out extensive consultations so that their followers will get well informed about the uninformed decisions they've already made. You see, at times we think that consultation with us is to enable us. No, At times, it's just to let us know what they have already decided. That is the reason why we as elite must influence them through the talking we do, the engagement, etc., before they make uninformed decisions. Because, as we all know, they think only about 4 years. We should not be oblivious to that.
Thank you very much, David. If you are tuned in, this is a JoyNews and Amalgam of Professional Body Speaker series. The topic for today, Centers of Prosperity at the Center of the World. How we can manage our cities better to stimulate economic growth. Our keynote speaker was Dr. David Ofosu-Dorte, Senior Partner for AB and David. And we also had planner Dr. Benedict Akest, Head of Planning at the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority.
Well, hello, good evening. Welcome to Joy News Prime. This broadcast is live from our studios here at Okomeme in Accra. We're live on DSTV channel 421 and GoTV channel 125 and all around the world on myjoyonline.com. My name is Emmanuel.